Hello, I'm back. Please pardon the aloe plant there. To cut to the chase, glamour is at it again. In the trend of making those 100 years of fashion whatever videos, glamour tended to actually make the most accurate ones there, but they've started a new thing called We Got a Fashion Historian to check the costumes in insert Disney movie here. And some of them are quite accurate. Bernadette Banner was featured in one about Mary Poppins, and that one was quite accurate. Some of them are less so, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. I'm not going to cover all of the ones that I find inaccurate. I want to focus on just one of them, which I think can highlight the problems with their inaccuracies, and that is their video about Snow White. And really, their problem stems from choosing a very, very general time period to set the film. And the reason that Bernadette Banner did such a good job of pinpointing what was right and wrong with the Mary Poppins costumes was because she set the time period very, very exactly. Not only did she set it to 1910, she, I think, set it to August of 1910. So she got it down to within a month of when this film took place, and that's really what you need to do in order to get the time period correct. So what this film did was this. This is their kind of beginning. 16th century Germany. And that's going to be a big problem because the 16th century was a century and the fashions changed significantly. And you can see this there. You can see where they're going wrong throughout this video, because in this video, to illustrate 16th century fashion, they use portraits from 1485 all the way up to 1600. So obviously there are going to be problems with that. I mean, that's like saying that what people wore in 1900 is the same as what people wore in 1999, and it's just not true. So you're going to come up with a pretty garbled result if you go into this saying this is what people wore in this century. So they're going through and correcting Snow White and the Evil Queen's outfits. So I'm going to put up their little, I wanted to record myself actually watching the video and then just pause it and have my commentary in there, but I don't want to get sued. So I screenshotted their little drawing cards, and I'm just going to go through and talk about whether or not they're actually correct or not, or what's wrong with them if they are wrong. So for Snow White, the first thing that they're putting her in is the smock. That is correct. That would have been the first garment for all of the 16th century, for all classes. Also for the 15th century and the 14th century and the 13th century. It's been pretty universal. In the late 17th, early 18th century, the name changes to shift, and then in the 19th century, the name changes to chemise. But other than that, it's pretty much women were wearing the same thing from the Middle Ages all the way up to the 1920s. So yes, that's correct. Next layer, stockings. Yeah. Layer 3, stays. This is where we get a problem. Yes, she would have been wearing some corset. Well, let's modify that. If she were wearing this corset type thing, she would not have called it stays. This would have been called a pair of bodies in the 16th century. The name stays didn't come about until the late 17th, early 18th. I'm not sure exactly when, but it wasn't until at least 100 years after the 16th century. So that's a problem. And they do, in their defense, they do say that it was also called a pair of bodies, but they call it stay. That's the only time when they mention that it was also called a pair of bodies. And it wasn't that it was also called a pair of bodies. It was called a pair of bodies. The word, they did not call them stays at this point in time. Also, she might not have been wearing stays. It's because they've said the 16th century, you can't tell. Is this 1590? Yes, then she would have been wearing a pair of bodies. Is it 1510? Then no. Bodies didn't become commonplace for the aristocracy until the sort of 1560s, 1570s. Basically the Evil Queen and Snow White both have those standing collars, which are reminiscent of the open-fronted ruffs that were popular in the 1590s and 1600s. So that makes me think that this probably is in pair of bodies time period. This is probably in the 1590s. But again, they've been so broad, it's kind of half accurate to say that she's wearing a pair of bodies and half inaccurate, because we don't know if this is set in a time when pairs of bodies were not being worn. I'm sorry, the camera's over here, but I keep on wanting to look over there. So, yeah, that's the problem. Layer 4, the Spanish farthingale. Again, this is sort of, maybe it's accurate, we don't know. Is this set in 1590? Then the Spanish farthingale would not be accurate. She would have been wearing a French farthingale or a great farthingale. Is this set in 1520? Then yes, this would be accurate. The Spanish farthingale was not, the Spanish farthingale and pairs of bodies did not overlap a whole lot. Or I should rephrase that. The Spanish farthingale without the bum roll and pairs of bodies did not overlap. So there was a time period, the kind of 1560s and 70s, when women were wearing bodies and were also wearing Spanish farthingales, but they would have been wearing bum rolls with those farthingales. And they're not giving Snow White a bum roll in this. So this is a much earlier style of Spanish farthingale. So it is accurate, but it's accurate for the 1520s or 30s, not for the 1550s, 60s. Next layer, kirtle. Yes, that's fine. Kirtles were worn in some form or another for pretty much all of the 16th century. Next layer, the dress. It would have been called a gown, but yes, that's also accurate enough. They've kind of put her in a 1550s-ish style, 1550s, 1560s. I'm just going to check my notes here. Yeah, so they put her in a 50s, 60s-ish style here. And then they put sleeves on her. Yes, this is, these are also accurate. I do want to mention, though, that the person mentions that puffy sleeves were fashionable in the 16th century and in the 1930s, and that is, again, not true. Puffy sleeves were fashionable in the late 16th century and in the 1930s. I can't really speak to the 1930s, but they were fashionable in the late 16th century, in sort of 1570 through 1600. Puffy sleeves were fashionable, but in the early and mid 16th century, puffy sleeves were not fashionable, especially, around the shoulder. If you look at portraits from, 1500 up to 1550s, the shoulders are quite tightly fitting. So yeah, puffy sleeves were fashionable during the 16th century, but only during a very specific part of it. But the sleeves they've put her in are fine for the 1550s. The partlet and the ruff. Yes, this is accurate, and this is correct for the 1550s, 1560s. The collar, the standing collar that Snow White was wearing in the original cartoon was more reminiscent, I think, of the 1590s. They just kind of arbitrarily decided to put her in a style that's 40 years earlier than what her cartoon, what her drawing was hinting at. And I'm not quite sure why they decided to do that. But yeah, this is fine for the 50s or 60s, although I think it's not quite as accurate as the source material. And layer 10, the hair and hood. No, she's shown wearing a French hood, which was very, very fashionable obviously in France and in England in the first part. It didn't really come into England until sort of like the 1520s. In Germany, again, I'm basing this off of more knowledge of English fashion. German fashion tended to be much more localized and kind of folk-ish. Like if you look at pictures of Anne of Cleves, she's not wearing fashionable dress. She's wearing these German styles. So Germany tended to have pretty wilder fashions, but we're going to, since they're clearly trying to depict kind of more English, British fashions, that's what I'm basing this off of. In England, the French hood was fashionable from kind of like the 1520s to the 1540s at the very latest. She is being drawn in the 1550s or 60s. The French hood and this gown do not go together. This is like wearing a this is like wearing a hat from 1900 with a dress from the 1930s. It just doesn't. No, it's two different time periods. So the French hood is accurate for the 16th century, but it's only accurate for part of the 16th century. We keep on coming back to this. Is the things that they're doing are pretty much accurate, but they're inaccurate by the way that they're mixing them together. So now let's look at the evil queen. So they got her undergarments mostly right. Her face in this just cracks me up. They've gotten her undergarments correct. The smock, the stays and the kirtle, the bodies in the kirtle, yes, depending on what part of the 16th century she's in. She would be wearing bodies. I'm not going to get back into that since I already did it. Okay, so next, the farthingale and the bum roll. They've given her a bum roll, which is wonderful if they're going for the sort of 1550s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s look. If they're going for the earlier 16th century, then that is not wonderful. It is inaccurate. But yeah, they've given her a bum roll now. So then the next layer, the gown. Yeah, this looks fine for the sort of mid to late 16th century. With the bum roll, it looks more 1570s, late 60s to very, very, very early 80s. And then the sleeves. They've given her trumpet sleeves with turnbacks. These were fashionable in the 1530s and the 1540s. These were not fashionable when bum rolls were fashionable. It's so annoying. So again, they're an accurate piece of 16th century costume, but they're not accurate in the context that they're being shown here. It's so annoying. Next, the collar. Now this collar that they've given her is accurate for the very early 17th century. They had these kind of standing darted collars that look like this. But those were fashionable in around 1610. What they, I think, were going for were the open-fronted ruffs of the 1590s, which looked nothing like that. And also in the 1590s, again, she would not be wearing those sleeves. Also, her skirt would have been much, much bigger. She would have been wearing a French farthingale, and not a Spanish farthingale. And then they've also given her a cape because the evil queen in the movie has a cape. I have seen maybe 2 portraits of aristocratic women at this time where they're wearing capes. This was not a... the cape was not a piece of fashionable dress. You could wear a cloak if you were going out on a cold day, but you would not wear a cape. You could have a veil. Oftentimes, aristocratic women would wear a veil kind of pinned here, and sometimes in Elizabeth I's portraits you can see it. It's kind of done in this figure of 8 style, and it's kind of sticking up around her head. And that could flow all the way down to the floor and be kind of cape-esque. Also in the 1590s, Elizabeth I famously had those gigantic wired wings. You can see them on her most of her portraits. And that oftentimes also had a gauzy type of thing that would kind of flow down in a cape-esque way. But capes in general were not part of actual clothing at this time. Then her hair, I can't really see what they seem to have given her these kind of like side buns, which could be fashionable for Germany. She's not dressed in German fashion at all, really. So at this time, it seems like they're trying to go for kind of like a 1590s thing. So she would have had her hair kind of pulled up into this heart-shaped thing with some sort of coiled braided thing covered with a jeweled net in the back or something along those lines. Not these kind of like weird Princess Leia buns. And then last of all, they've given her a girdle and a crown. Those are fine. So yeah, the thing that we've kept on coming back to is the elements that they put in. Most of them were historically accurate on their own, but because they said this takes place in the 16th century, they put together things that don't go together. They've put together 1520s sleeves with a 1550s pair of bodies with a 1610s supported darted collar. I mean, no, it just doesn't work that way. With this kind of thing, you really need to narrow it down to a decade, if you can. Even better if you can narrow it down to within 5 years. That can be kind of difficult. With Snow White, it would have been that would have been pretty much impossible to do. I would say that the movie very, very kind of roughly hints at the 1590s, because the Queen and Snow White both have those standing collars. Snow White has those slashed sleeves. So they both have the kind of like very, very vaguely 1590s characteristics. So I would say that I think that this video would have gone a lot better if they had said this movie takes place in the 1590s, or if they'd said that it takes place in the 1520s. If they'd chosen a decade rather than a century, it would have been a lot more accurate, because as it stands now, they're pairing things from the beginning of the century with things from the end of the century, and those just do not go together. That's, again, like pairing an Edwardian S-bend corset with a pair of, I don't even know what people wore in 1999. Thermal top. Which just doesn't work. So that's my 2 cents. I'm not trying to, hate on this video or on this series. Again, some of them are very, very well done, and I think that it is a very cool concept. And I understand that a lot of work went into making these, but so I guess I'm not trying to attack anybody here. I just want to point out that it is very, very important to do your research fully. Otherwise, you're going to be spreading misinformation, which I don't think is okay. So I believe that's all I want to say. Thank you for watching, and Glamour, please don't sue me. Please don't be angry at me. I don't like it when people are angry at me. I'm trying to be constructive. Yeah.